"Are you lost too, mister?" asked little girl to Hell's Angel at the park. What he did next. The late autumn sun cast long shadows across the park's winding paths, painting the world in shades of amber and gold. Ryder sat motionless on a weathered wooden bench, his massive frame taking up more than his fair share of space. The leather of his vest creaked softly as he leaned forward, resting his tattooed arms on his thighs. A gentle breeze rustled through the remaining leaves on the trees, carrying with it the sounds of children playing in the distance. Ryder watched as parents hurried their little ones away whenever they wandered too close to his bench. He was used to it by now, the way mothers clutched their purses tighter, how fathers positioned themselves between him and their families, the whispers and sidelong glances. His fingers, adorned with heavy silver rings, drummed absently against his knee. The ink that covered his skin told stories of his past, stories that made people cross to the other side of the street when they saw him coming. Eagles, skulls, and intricate designs snaked their way up his arms, disappearing beneath the sleeves of his shirt. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. An elderly couple shuffled past, the old man pulling his wife closer to his side. Ryder kept his gaze fixed on the ground, counting the cracks in the concrete path beneath his heavy boots. He'd chosen this spot deliberately, away from the playground and the busy walking paths, where he could observe life without being part of it. A group of teenagers on skateboards clattered past, their laughter cutting through the peaceful afternoon air. One of them caught sight of Ryder and nudged his friends, their voices dropping to whispers as they picked up speed. Ryder didn't move, didn't acknowledge them. He was a stone statue, unmoved by the ripples of discomfort he created in the park's peaceful pond. Time seemed to slow in these moments. Ryder found himself counting the people who avoided his bench, 12 so far this afternoon. He watched a squirrel dart across the path, the only creature that didn't seem bothered by his presence. The small animal paused briefly, considering him with bright eyes before scampering up a nearby tree. The sun dipped lower, casting his shadow longer across the ground. The air grew cooler, and Ryder pulled his vest tighter around his broad shoulders. He contemplated leaving, heading back to the familiar comfort of his empty apartment, when something unexpected caught his attention. Small footsteps approached, unhurried and unafraid. They stopped directly in front of him, but Ryder kept his eyes down, expecting them to quickly retreat like all the others. Instead, a tiny voice broke through his solitude. "Are you lost too, mister?" Ryder's head snapped up, startled by the direct address. Standing before him was a little girl, no more than 4 years old, with unruly brown hair and bright, curious eyes. Her dress was slightly too big, hanging awkwardly on her small frame. She looked up at him without a trace of fear, her head tilted to one side as she waited for his answer. The question hung in the air between them. Ryder felt frozen in place, his usual mask of indifference cracking slightly under the weight of her innocent inquiry. For the first time in years, someone was looking at him, truly looking at him, without judgment or fear. The sensation was foreign, almost uncomfortable, and he found himself at a loss for words. Ryder blinked, struggling to find his voice as he stared down at the little girl. Her brown eyes met his without hesitation, holding a trust that made his chest tighten in an unfamiliar way. She couldn't have been more than 4, with untied shoelaces and a slightly crooked hair bow that looked close to falling out. "I'm not lost," he said finally, his deep voice coming out gentler than usual. "But I think maybe you are." Maggie's lower lip trembled slightly. "I can't find my mommy. She was right there, and then she wasn't." She pointed vaguely toward the playground, her small finger wavering in the air. Ryder straightened up, scanning the park. The afternoon crowd had thinned, but there were still several groups scattered around, a couple walking their dog, some teenagers on the basketball court, and a few parents with their children near the swings. None of them seemed to be searching for a missing child. "How long have you been looking for your mom?" he asked, trying to keep his voice soft. The last thing he wanted was to frighten her. "Forever," Maggie said solemnly, though Ryder suspected forever probably meant just a few minutes in her young mind. She scuffed her shoe against the ground, creating little marks in the dirt. "My tummy feels funny." The worry in her voice struck something deep inside Ryder, something he thought he'd buried years ago. He recognized the fear in her eyes, the same fear he'd felt as a kid when he'd been lost and alone, though for very different reasons. "What's your name?" he asked, although he kept his distance, aware of how his presence might look to others. "Maggie," she said, brightening a little. "What's yours?" "I'm Ryder." He glanced around again, more urgently this time. Surely someone must be looking for her. "What does your mom look like, Maggie?" "She's pretty," Maggie said helpfully, as if that would be enough to identify her mother among the park goers. "And she has a blue jacket today." Ryder ran a hand through his beard, weighing his options. He couldn't leave her alone, but he was painfully aware of how it would appear, a man covered in tattoos walking around with a small child. Still, looking at Maggie's trusting face, he knew he had no choice. "Would you like help finding your mom?" he asked carefully. Maggie nodded eagerly, reaching up without hesitation to take his large, calloused hand in her tiny one. The simple gesture caught him off guard. It had been years since anyone had touched him without fear or ulterior motives. "Your hands are big," she observed matter-of-factly, her small fingers barely wrapping around two of his. Ryder stood slowly, hyper-aware of how he must look, a giant of a man in a leather vest, holding hands with a little girl in a flowery dress. A couple walking nearby quickly changed direction when they saw him, throwing suspicious glances over their shoulders. "Let's try the playground first," he said, deliberately ignoring their stares. Maggie skipped alongside him, seemingly oblivious to the attention they were drawing. Her complete trust in him was both touching and terrifying. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had looked at him the way she did, like he was someone who could help, rather than harm. They started down the path together, Maggie's hand warm and small in his. More park-goers gave them a wide berth, some whispering behind their hands, but Ryder focused solely on the task at hand. Right now, nothing mattered except helping this little girl find her way back to her mother. "Do you like the pictures on your arms?" Maggie asked as they walked, her eyes fixed on the colorful tattoos that covered Ryder's forearms. Ryder glanced down at his sleeve of tattoos, dragons, skulls, and flames that had once seemed so important. Now, walking with this innocent child, they felt like remnants of a different life. "Yeah, I guess I do." "They're pretty," Maggie declared, tracing a finger along a red flame design. "Like a coloring book." A small chuckle escaped Ryder's lips, surprising him. He couldn't remember the last time he'd genuinely laughed. "Never thought of them that way before." They passed the basketball courts, where a group of teenagers had stopped their game to stare. Ryder heard their whispers, caught fragments of Hell's Angel and Crazy, but he kept his eyes forward. Maggie's hand tightened around his finger as she hopped over a crack in the sidewalk. "Don't step on the lines," she said seriously, "or the bears will get you." Bears, huh? Ryder found himself playing along, carefully stepping over the crack. "We definitely don't want that." Maggie giggled, the sound pure and bright in the afternoon air. "You're funny, Mr. Ryder." She swung their joined hands back and forth. My friend Sarah at preschool says her daddy is funny too, but he doesn't have pictures on his arms like you do." Something in Ryder's chest tightened at her words. Here was this little girl, comparing him to someone's father, when most people crossed the street to avoid him. He cleared his throat. "Your mom must be really worried about you." "She tells me not to wander off," Maggie admitted, scuffing her shoe against the ground. "But I saw a butterfly, and it was so pretty." They rounded the corner near the playground, and Ryder scanned the area again. More parents had gathered, some with phones in hand, looking concerned. Then he saw her, a woman in a blue jacket, moving frantically between the swings and the slide, her face etched with worry. "Maggie!" she called out, her voice cracking. "Maggie, where are you?" Maggie's face lit up instantly. "Mommy!" She let go of Ryder's hand and broke into a run, her little legs carrying her across the grass. Ryder hung back, watching as the woman, Claire, he would later learn, dropped to her knees, gathering Maggie into her arms. The relief on her face was palpable, her eyes squeezed shut as she held her daughter close. Other parents nearby relaxed visibly, putting their phones away and returning to their own children. From his position several yards away, Ryder observed the reunion. Claire's blue jacket was worn at the elbows, and her brown hair was falling out of its ponytail, signs of a life lived paycheck to paycheck, of someone doing their best with what they had. He recognized that look. He'd seen it in his own mother's eyes years ago. He shifted his weight, unsure whether to approach or slip away quietly. Before he could decide, Maggie turned in her mother's arms and pointed toward him, her face beaming. Claire looked up, and for a moment their eyes met across the distance. Ryder saw the flicker of uncertainty cross her face, the natural reaction he'd grown used to over the years. But there was something else there too, something that made him stay rooted to the spot instead of turning away. A glimpse of gratitude, perhaps, or recognition of a kindness she hadn't expected. Claire stood up slowly, keeping Maggie close to her side. Her hands were still trembling as she brushed grass from her worn jeans. Taking a deep breath, she walked toward Ryder, who remained rooted in place like a weathered oak tree. "I can't thank you enough," Claire said, her voice unsteady. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, a nervous habit she couldn't shake. "I only looked away for a second to answer a work call, and then she was—" Her voice cracked slightly. Ryder shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the gratitude in her eyes. The leather of his jacket creaked as he shrugged his broad shoulders. "Anyone would have done the same," he said, his deep voice softer than his appearance would suggest. "No," Claire shook her head. "They wouldn't have. Most people would have just walked away." She squeezed Maggie's hand. "I'm so sorry she bothered you. She's usually not supposed to talk to Claire caught herself, realizing how that might sound. "Mr. Ryder has pretty pictures on his arms, Mommy," Maggie piped up, oblivious to the tension. She pointed at his tattoos with her free hand. "Like a coloring book." A slight flush crept up Claire's neck. "Maggie, honey, don't point," she gently corrected, then looked back at Ryder. "I'm sorry. She's at that age where everything is fascinating." Ryder's lips twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Kids say what they see," he said simply. Claire nodded, but Ryder noticed how she unconsciously pulled Maggie a little closer. Her eyes darted to his patches, the ones that marked him as a member of the Hell's Angels. He saw the moment recognition flickered across her face, saw the subtle change in her posture. "Well, we should probably get going," Claire said, her tone polite but more distant now. "I need to get this little wanderer home for lunch." She managed a smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thank you again, really. What you did, it means more than you know." Just glad she's safe, Ryder replied, taking a small step back to give them space. He could read the signals clear as day, the way Claire's shoulders had tensed, how her eyes now avoided his. Maggie waved enthusiastically. Bye, Mr. Ryder. Thank you for helping me find Mommy. Claire gave one final nod of appreciation, but Ryder could see the conflict in her expression, gratitude warring with ingrained caution. She turned away, guiding Maggie along the path, her steps just a little too quick to be casual. Ryder watched them go, standing perfectly still in the afternoon sun. The leather of his jacket felt heavier somehow, the weight of his patches more noticeable than usual. He caught fragments of Claire's voice carried back on the breeze as they walked away. Maggie, sweetheart, what did I tell you about wandering off? You scared Mommy so much. Ryder sank back onto the wooden bench, his usual spot feeling different somehow. The park continued its afternoon bustle around him, but his mind kept replaying Claire's words. Thank you. It means more than you know. The sincerity in her voice had caught him off guard. He ran a weathered hand over his beard, trying to make sense of the unfamiliar warmth in his chest. People didn't thank him. They avoided him, crossed the street when they saw him coming, whispered behind his back. That was how it had been for years, and he'd grown comfortable with it, even expected it. A group of mothers hurried past his bench, pulling their children closer. The familiar sight brought him back to reality, but this time it stung in a way it hadn't before. He watched them scurry away, their fearful glances a stark contrast to little Maggie's trusting eyes. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the park's grass, and Ryder found himself studying his tattooed hands. Each mark told a story, most of them dark chapters he'd rather forget. But today, these same hands had held a little girl's trust, had helped instead of hurt. He pulled out his phone, checking the time. The club would be meeting soon at their usual spot, expecting him to show up like always. But for the first time in years, the thought of going there felt hollow. He couldn't shake the image of Claire's face, the way her gratitude had melted into unease when she'd noticed his patches. The park began to empty as evening approached. Parents collected their children from the playground, the food vendors packed up their carts, and the joggers made their final laps. Ryder remained on his bench, watching the sky turn golden. In his mind, he kept hearing Maggie's innocent comment about his tattoos being pretty pictures. No one had ever described them that way before. Usually people saw them as marks of danger, warnings to stay away. But she'd seen them through different eyes, pure, uncomplicated, kind. The streetlights flickered on one by one. Ryder's phone buzzed again, probably the club wondering where he was. He ignored it. Instead, he found himself thinking about Claire's tired eyes, the way she'd been so frightened when Maggie was missing. He wondered what their story was, what had put that mix of strength and wariness in Claire's expression. The evening air grew cooler, and Ryder zipped up his leather jacket. He should head to the club, should fall back into his normal routine. But something had shifted today, like a lock clicking open somewhere deep inside him. Without really understanding why, he knew he'd be back tomorrow, sitting on this same bench, watching the park come to life again. Standing up, he took one last look at the now empty playground. The swings moved gently in the breeze, and somewhere in the distance, a child's laughter echoed. Ryder felt something he hadn't experienced in years, curiosity about someone else's life, wonder about their struggles and joys. He wanted to understand why that mattered suddenly, why these strangers had managed to crack through his carefully maintained wall of indifference. Tomorrow, he decided. He'd come back tomorrow, though he couldn't explain, even to himself, what he was hoping to find. The morning sun cast long shadows across the park's winding paths as Ryder made his way through the entrance. He'd shown up earlier than usual, his leather jacket zipped against the morning chill. A few early joggers gave him a wide berth, their sneakers crunching on the gravel path as they veered away. He shoved his hands in his pockets, feeling strangely out of place without his usual afternoon timing. Everything looked different in the morning light. Fresher, more alive. The dew still clung to the grass, and birds hopped around searching for breakfast. "What am I even doing here?" he muttered to himself, kicking at a pebble. His phone had several missed calls from the club, but he'd ignored them all. For the first time in years, their demands felt less important than this unnamed pull that had brought him back to the park. Ryder found himself walking past the playground where he'd first met Maggie. The swings moved gently in the breeze, and a memory of her innocent question, "Are you lost too, mister?" echoed in his mind. He touched his beard self-consciously, wondering what a little girl had seen in him that made her unafraid. The morning wore on, and Ryder paced the paths, pretending he wasn't searching for familiar faces. He bought a coffee from a vendor who trembled while making change, stopped to watch a group of elderly men playing chess, and counted the dogs that walked past with their owners. Each time he heard a child's laugh, his head turned automatically, looking for Maggie's bright smile. By mid-morning, the park had filled with its usual crowd. Mothers gathered near the playground, business people hurried through on their way to lunch meetings, and teenagers sprawled on the grass with their phones. Ryder felt increasingly conspicuous, like a dark cloud in a sunny sky. He was about to give up, feeling foolish for spending hours wandering aimlessly, when he spotted them near the park's eastern entrance. Claire struggled with several grocery bags, her face pinched with concentration. Maggie skipped alongside her, chattering away, while a small boy, who must be Max, toddled behind them, constantly stopping to examine things on the ground. "Max, honey, please keep up," Claire called out, her voice strained. She shifted the heavy bags, trying to reach for her son while keeping hold of everything else. Maggie darted forward to help her brother, but he giggled and ran in the opposite direction. Ryder stood rooted to his spot, watching the scene unfold. Claire's exhaustion was visible in every movement, the way her shoulders slumped, how she kept blowing strands of hair from her face. The grocery bags looked ready to split, and Max was getting dangerously close to the street. Something protective stirred in Ryder's chest as he watched them. It wasn't pity. He'd seen enough of that in his life to know the difference. This feeling was deeper, more visceral, like an old instinct waking up after a long sleep. He found himself taking a step forward, then stopping, unsure if his help would be welcome or just frighten them more. From his position behind a large oak tree, Ryder observed as Claire finally corralled Max back to her side. She looked around nervously, as if expecting judgment from the other park-goers, and Ryder recognized that wariness. It was the same look he'd seen in her eyes yesterday, the look of someone who'd learned to expect the worst from others. Chapter 7. The First Act of Selflessness. Ryder watched as another grocery bag started to slip from Claire's grasp. Before he could second-guess himself, he stepped out from behind the tree and cleared his throat softly. "Need some help with those?" His deep voice came out gentler than usual, trying not to startle her. Claire jumped slightly, clutching her bags closer. Recognition flickered across her face, followed by uncertainty. "Oh, you're the man from yesterday, the one who helped Maggie." "Uncle Ryder," Maggie bounced on her toes, beaming up at him. Her enthusiasm made him shift uncomfortably, unused to such open friendliness. "Just Ryder," he corrected softly, then gestured to the bags. "Those look heavy." Claire glanced down at her struggling arms, then at Max, who was once again wandering toward a nearby flower bed. The internal debate played clearly across her face, the wariness of accepting help from a stranger, versus the obvious need for it. A can of soup rolled out of one of the overstuffed bags, and Ryder caught it before it hit the ground. That seemed to make up Claire's mind. "Actually, yes," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "Help would be really nice. Thank you." Ryder carefully took the heaviest bags from her, making sure to move slowly and keep some distance between them. He noticed how she relaxed slightly when he didn't crowd her space. "I live just 3 blocks from here," Claire explained, gathering Max back to her side. The little boy stared up at Ryder with wide eyes, thumbs stuck firmly in his mouth. They began walking, Maggie skipping between them and chattering about her favorite cartoon show. Claire kept glancing at Ryder, as if trying to solve a puzzle. "You know," she said finally, adjusting her remaining bag, "most people just walk past when they see me struggling. They probably think I should have a better handle on things by now." Ryder grunted softly. "People are quick to judge what they don't understand." Claire's steps faltered for a moment, and she looked at him with surprise. "Yes, exactly. Being a single mom. Sometimes it feels like wearing a sign that says, 'Please criticize my life choices.'" She gave a small, bitter laugh. "The grocery store cashier actually asked me today where their father was. Can you believe that? As if it was any of her business." Ryder listened, watching how her shoulders tensed as she spoke. He recognized the defensive posture of someone used to protecting themselves from the world's harsh opinions. "Grocery store cashiers should stick to counting change," he said simply. That earned him a genuine laugh from Claire, the sound brightening her tired face. "They really should." Maggie tugged at Ryder's jacket. "Mommy works really hard," she announced proudly. "She reads me 3 stories every night, even when she's super tired." Claire blushed, reaching down to smooth Maggie's hair. "Honey, I'm sure Ryder doesn't want to hear about our bedtime routine." But Ryder found himself oddly touched by this glimpse into their lives, the image of Claire reading stories despite her exhaustion, trying to keep something normal and special for her kids despite everything else. "3 stories is impressive," he said softly, surprising himself with how much he meant it. Claire looked up at him, really looked at him for the first time, and something in her expression shifted. "It's not much, but, well, you do what you can, right? Sometimes that means asking for help with grocery bags from kind strangers in the park." She offered him a small, tentative smile. Over the next few days, Ryder found himself drawn back to the park like a compass finding north. He'd spot Claire with her children at different times, after school runs, during weekend playdates, or quick stops at the playground. Each time, he'd find a way to help, whether it was carrying bags, keeping an eye on Max while Claire tied Maggie's, shoelaces, or simply offering a steady presence when both kids seemed determined to run in opposite directions. "You really don't have to keep helping us," Claire said one afternoon, watching as Ryder retrieved Max's sippy cup from where it had rolled under a bench. Her voice carried less tension than before, though her arms remained crossed protectively across her chest. "Don't mind," Ryder replied, wiping the cup on his jacket before handing it back to Max. The toddler grabbed it with both hands, his earlier shyness around Ryder beginning to fade. Maggie danced around them, singing a made-up song about butterflies. "Mommy, can Mr. Ryder push me on the swings? Please?" Claire hesitated, and Ryder saw the familiar flash of uncertainty cross her face. But then Maggie added, "He has gentle hands, like when he helped with my shoelaces yesterday." Something in Claire's expression softened. She nodded slowly, and Ryder followed an ecstatic Maggie to the swings. As he gave careful pushes, he could feel Claire's eyes on him, evaluating, reconsidering. The next day, Claire arrived with an extra sandwich in her bag. I just I noticed you're always here around lunchtime, she explained, her cheeks flushing slightly as she held it out to him. It's nothing fancy, just peanut butter and jelly. Ryder accepted the sandwich with careful hands, noticing how she didn't flinch when their fingers briefly touched. Thank you, he said, meaning it more than she could know. They sat on neighboring benches, watching the kids play in the sandbox. Claire spoke more freely now, sharing small details about her life, her part-time job at the library, Max's recent victory over potty training, Maggie's upcoming dance recital. Ryder mostly listened, offering occasional comments or nods. But when Claire mentioned struggling with a leaky faucet in her kitchen, he found himself saying, I could take a look at that. Used to do maintenance work. The word surprised them both. Claire twisted her hands in her lap, clearly torn. Finally, she took a deep breath and said, Actually, I was wondering, would you like to get coffee sometime? The question hung in the air between them. Ryder's heart thumped heavily in his chest, and he noticed Claire's fingers nervously playing with the edge of her sleeve. Nothing fancy, she added quickly. There's a little cafe near the library. I just thought, well, you've been so kind to us, and maybe it would be nice to talk somewhere that isn't a park bench. Ryder looked at her, really looked at her, and saw past her nervous exterior to the courage it must have taken to make this offer. He understood what it meant. A single mother, inviting someone like him into her world beyond these chance meetings. Coffee would be good, he said quietly, his gruff voice gentler than usual. Claire's smile, though tentative, was genuine. Tomorrow, around 10, the kids will be at their grandmother's. Ryder nodded, and they both turned back to watch the children play, sitting in a silence that felt, for the first time, completely comfortable. The coffee shop was quiet at 10 in the morning, with just a few regulars scattered among the mismatched tables and comfortable chairs. Claire sat across from Ryder at a small corner table, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of chai tea. Ryder's black coffee sat untouched, his large frame making the vintage chair beneath him look almost toy-like. Thank you for coming, Claire said, breaking the silence. I know this isn't your usual... Well, I mean... She trailed off, flustered. It's nice, Ryder said simply, his deep voice soft. He glanced around the cozy space with its exposed brick walls and local artwork. Different from where I usually get coffee? Claire smiled, relaxing a little. I come here sometimes during my lunch break at the library. It's peaceful. They sat quietly for a moment, the gentle jazz music filling the space between them. Claire took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. I wanted to tell you why I was so careful at first, she began, her fingers tightening around her cup. Before Maggie and Max, I was married. Or, well, living with someone who promised we'd get married someday. Ryder nodded, his expression encouraging her to continue. He wasn't kind, Claire said, her voice dropping. At first, everything was perfect. Then it changed, slowly. A sharp word here, a shove there. He always apologized, said it would never happen again. She paused, taking a shaky breath. Until one night, it got really bad. Maggie was 2 and I was pregnant with Max. I knew I had to leave. Ryder's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting her speak. We ran in the middle of the night. My sister helped us. We stayed with her until Max was born. Then I found work at the library. Claire's voice grew stronger. It's been hard, being alone with 2 kids, but it's better than living in fear. You're brave, Ryder said quietly. Taking care of them by yourself. Claire looked up, surprised by the gentleness in his voice. Sometimes I don't feel brave at all. But then I look at my kids, and I know I made the right choice. She hesitated, then added, "That's why I was nervous when we first met. Your appearance, it reminded me of him and his friends." Ryder shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I understand," he said, finally taking a sip of his coffee. "Most people judge me by how I look. Can't blame them." "But you're different," Claire said softly. "I see how gentle you are with the kids, how you really listen when I talk." She paused. "Will you tell me about yourself? Your life?" Ryder stared into his coffee cup, his shoulders tense. "Not much to tell," he said gruffly. Then, after a long moment, he added, "Been part of a motorcycle club most of my adult life. The Angels." Claire's eyes widened at the mention of the notorious group, and Ryder quickly looked away. "It's not important," he said, his voice rough. "Just something from before." The weight of those words settled between them, heavy with unspoken history. Claire watched him, her expression filled with sympathy, but Ryder kept his eyes fixed on his coffee, his past clearly a door he wasn't ready to open. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows of Claire's small apartment, casting long shadows across the worn carpet. Ryder stood in the middle of the living room, his imposing frame making the space feel even smaller than it was. He'd shown up at Claire's door after she mentioned needing help rearranging some furniture to make more space for the kids. "Just a little to the left," Claire directed, as Ryder easily shifted the heavy oak bookcase. Her collection of paperbacks and children's books teetered precariously on the shelves. "Perfect, thank you." Maggie sat cross-legged on the couch, watching them with wide eyes while Max napped in his room. She clutched her favorite stuffed rabbit, fascinated by how Ryder could move things that her mommy usually struggled with. "Need anything else moved?" Ryder asked, wiping his hands on his jeans. Claire surveyed the room, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "The coffee table? It would be nice to have more space for the kids to play." As they worked together to shift the table, Claire's sleeve rode up, revealing a small butterfly tattoo on her wrist. Ryder noticed it, his eyebrows rising slightly. "Got it after I left," Claire explained, touching the delicate design. "To remind myself that change is possible." She paused, then added quietly, "Sometimes I wonder if I'm really changing anything, though. Every month it's the same struggle. Rent, groceries, daycare costs. Some days it feels like I'm just treading water." Ryder straightened up, his expression thoughtful. "You're working hard. Anyone can see that." "But is it enough?" Claire sank onto the couch beside Maggie, who immediately crawled into her lap. "The library job barely covers our expenses. I try to pick up extra shifts when I can, but then I miss time with the kids." She stroked Maggie's hair absently. "Sometimes I feel like I'm failing them." Ryder stood awkwardly for a moment before settling into the armchair across from them. The old springs creaked under his weight. "I see them, you know," he said, his voice low and careful. "How they look at you. How Maggie's eyes light up when you walk into a room. That kid's got more love in her life than most." Claire blinked rapidly, touched by his words. "It's just hard sometimes, doing it all alone." "You're doing your best," Ryder offered quietly. Then, clearing his throat, he quickly changed the subject. "This chair's seen better days. I could fix these springs for you if you want." But something had shifted in that moment of vulnerability. Claire noticed how Ryder's hands, usually so steady, fidgeted slightly with the frayed edge of the armchair. For the first time, she saw past his tough exterior to someone who might understand, more than he let on about feeling alone. "That would be nice," she said softly, recognizing his need to move past the emotional moment. "Thank you, Ryder." Maggie chose that moment to pipe up. "Can we have cookies now, Mommy? You promised." Claire laughed, the tension breaking. Yes, sweetheart. Would you like one too, Ryder? He nodded, grateful for the distraction, but his eyes lingered on Claire for a moment longer, something unspoken passing between them in the quiet of the afternoon light. The morning air was crisp as Ryder walked through his usual route to the park. His heavy boots left impressions in the dewy grass, and for once, he didn't mind the curious glances from other park-goers. These days, his thoughts were occupied with something else entirely, or rather, someone else. He found himself checking his watch more often, knowing Claire usually brought the kids to the playground after her morning shift at the library. The familiar sound of Maggie's laughter would reach his ears before he'd spot them, and Max would toddle behind his sister, trying to keep up on his short legs. Today was no different. As he rounded the corner near the swings, Maggie's voice carried across the playground. "Higher, Mommy! Push me higher!" Claire stood behind the swing set, giving gentle pushes to her daughter while keeping an eye on Max, who was contentedly playing in the sandbox. Her hair caught the sunlight, and Ryder noticed how it brought out the golden highlights he'd never paid attention to before. "Red!" Max squealed when he spotted Ryder. The nickname had stuck after the toddler couldn't quite manage Ryder. The little boy abandoned his sandcastle and ran toward him with open arms. Ryder scooped him up, something that had become natural over the past few weeks. "Hey, little man, building something good over there?" Claire turned at the sound of Max's excitement, and her face softened into a warm smile. "I was wondering if we'd see you today." "Had some errands to run," Ryder said, settling Max on his hip with practiced ease. He couldn't help but notice how right it felt, how comfortable he'd become with these simple moments. They fell into their usual routine, Ryder pushing Maggie on the swing, while Claire helped Max with his sandcastle. The afternoon sun painted everything in warm hues, and the park buzzed with the gentle sounds of families enjoying the day. "You're getting pretty good at that," Claire commented, watching how Ryder carefully adjusted his strength to give Maggie the perfect push. "Had a good teacher," he replied, remembering how Claire had shown him just the right way to push the swing that first time. Back then, his hands had been uncertain, afraid his strength might be too much. Now, Maggie's delighted giggles were all the confirmation he needed. Later, as the sun began to dip and the air grew cooler, they walked together along the park's winding paths. Max had dozed off in his stroller, and Maggie skipped ahead, chasing butterflies and picking dandelions. "She made you a drawing at daycare today," Claire mentioned, reaching into her bag. "She insisted I give it to you." Ryder carefully unfolded the paper. 4 stick figures stood hand in hand, 2 tall ones and 2 small ones. His throat tightened at the sight of all the red crayon she'd used for his hair and beard. "Been a while since anyone drew me a picture," he managed, his voice gruff with emotion. "She talks about you all the time now," Claire said softly. "Max, too. They've really taken to you." Ryder looked down at the drawing again, tracing the wobbly lines with his finger. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this way, like he belonged somewhere, like his presence brought joy instead of fear. The feeling was foreign but welcome, like a warm current running through his chest. As they rounded the bend near the duck pond, Claire looked up at him. Their eyes met, and in that moment something passed between them, a quiet understanding that didn't need words. The connection was there, growing stronger with each passing day, whether they were ready to acknowledge it or not. The peaceful afternoon shattered like glass when young voices cut through the air. "Hey, look who it is, the big bad biker playing house." A group of teenagers lounged near the basketball court, pointing and snickering in Ryder's direction. Ryder's jaw clenched. He'd gotten used to the stares, the whispers, the way parents would pull their children closer when he passed. But this was different. This time, Claire and the kids were with him. "Guess the Hell's Angel got himself domesticated," another voice called out, followed by mocking laughter. "What's next, gonna start braiding hair?" Maggie looked up at Ryder, confusion clouding her young face. "Why are they being mean?" Ryder's hands balled into fists at his sides. The familiar surge of anger coursed through him, the kind that used to end with broken bones and bloody knuckles. His tattoos seemed to burn under his skin, reminders of a past he couldn't wash away. "Just ignore them," Claire said softly, her hand finding his forearm. Her touch was light, barely there, but it anchored him to the present. Her fingers were cool against his skin, which felt hot with mounting rage. The teenagers, emboldened by their distance and numbers, continued their taunts. "Better watch out, lady! Once a gang member, always a gang member!" Claire's grip tightened slightly on his arm. "They're just kids trying to look tough," she murmured, but Ryder could hear the worry in her voice. Not fear of him, but fear for him, worry about how these words might affect him. Max, oblivious to the tension, tugged at Ryder's pant leg, asking to be picked up. The simple gesture, this child's complete trust in him, made his chest ache. Here was this innocent boy who saw past his tattoos, past his rough exterior, past everything that made others judge him. "Looks like the tough guys. Gone soft!" Another jeer rang out, followed by exaggerated kissing sounds. Ryder felt his muscles coil, ready to spring. In his mind, he could already see himself storming over there, showing those punk kids exactly why people used to fear him. The old Ryder would have done just that, would have taught them a lesson they'd never forget. But Claire's hand was still on his arm, and Maggie was looking up at him with those trusting eyes, and Max was reaching for him with tiny hands. The rage inside him warred with something else, something newer and more fragile. "They don't know you," Claire said quietly, her words meant only for him. "They don't know how you've helped us, how kind you are with the kids." The teenagers' laughter echoed across the park. Each mocking word seemed to chip away at the new life Ryder had been trying to build. The labels clung to him like shadows: gang member, criminal, thug. No matter how many groceries he carried for Claire, no matter how gently he pushed Maggie on the swings, no matter how many times Max fell asleep in his arms, would anyone ever see past what he used to be? He looked down at his tattooed hands, hands that had done violence, but lately had been learning to build sandcastles and tie tiny shoelaces. The conflicting images seemed impossible to reconcile. Maybe that's all he'd ever be to the world. A frightening figure, someone to mock or fear, never someone to trust or love. Claire's hand slipped from his arm, and he felt its absence like a physical ache. The judgment of strangers had never bothered him before, but now, with Claire and the kids in his life, every taunt felt like a reminder of why he might never truly belong in their world. The walk home from the park felt endless. Ryder kept his eyes fixed ahead, his shoulders rigid, barely responding to Maggie's excited chatter about the butterflies she'd seen. Claire matched his pace, stealing concerned glances his way, but she didn't push him to talk. When they reached Claire's apartment building, Ryder stopped at the entrance. "I should go," he said, his voice rougher than usual. The words came out clipped and harsh, making him wince internally. "You could come up for dinner," Claire offered softly. "I'm making spaghetti. The kids love when you're here." Maggie bounced on her toes. "Please, Mr. Ryder, you do the best monster voices when you read stories." The innocent plea made his chest tighten. Max reached for him from Claire's arms, his little hands opening and closing in that familiar gesture that usually melted Ryder's resolve. But today, the sight only twisted the knife deeper. "Not tonight, kid." Ryder took a step back, creating physical distance to match the emotional walls rising inside him. "Got things to do." Claire's face fell slightly, but she nodded. She understood giving space, had probably needed it herself plenty of times. "Another time then," she said, shifting Max to her other hip. Ryder turned away without another word, his boots heavy on the concrete as he walked. Behind him, he heard Maggie's disappointed, "Bye, Mr. Ryder," and Claire's gentle shushing. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk as he walked, his mind churning with dark thoughts. Those teenagers' words kept echoing in his head, but it wasn't their mockery that bothered him most. It was the truth behind their taunts. Back in his sparse apartment, Ryder paced like a caged animal. The walls seemed to close in, decorated with the memories of his past life, his leather vest hanging in the corner, patches and pins telling stories of brotherhood and violence, photos of him with the club, grinning wildly at rallies and runs, a different man with the same face. He caught his reflection in the window, the tattoos crawling up his neck, the scars on his knuckles, the hard lines around his eyes. What right did he have to be around Claire's kids? To let them trust him? To let Claire see him as something he wasn't sure he could be? The sun set, and still Ryder paced. He thought about Claire's gentle touch on his arm at the park, how it had calmed the storm inside him. He thought about Maggie's complete trust, about Max's sleepy weight in his arms. These moments of peace felt stolen, like something he'd taken without earning. Night fell, and Ryder sat in his darkened living room, his phone silent beside him. Usually, Claire would send a picture of the kids before bedtime, Maggie making funny faces, or Max covered in whatever he'd had for dinner. Tonight, his screen remained dark, respecting the distance he'd put between them. Hours ticked by as Ryder wrestled with his thoughts. His past wasn't just tattoos and leather. It was blood and broken laws, loyalties that ran deep and debts that never quite got paid. Claire deserved to know the truth, but the thought of seeing fear replace the warmth in her eyes made his stomach turn. The neon signs from the bar across the street cast shifting colors through his window, painting his walls in reds and blues. Ryder sat motionless, trapped between the man he'd been and the man Claire made him want to be, uncertain if there was any way to bridge that gap without destroying everything in the process. The rumble of motorcycles shattered the morning quiet. Ryder's shoulders tensed as he recognized the familiar sound of Harley engines. Not just any bikes, but ones he knew as well as his own heartbeat. He was walking through the small parking lot behind his apartment building when 3 motorcycles pulled in, blocking his path. Snake, the club's sergeant-at-arms, killed his engine first. His weathered face was hard beneath his graying beard. 2 other members, Diesel and Crow, flanked him, their expressions equally grim. "Been looking for you, Red," Snake said, using Ryder's old road name. "You've been scarce lately." Ryder stood his ground, feet planted firmly. "Been busy?" "Yeah, we've heard." Diesel's lip curled. "Playing house? With some single mom and her brats. That what you're doing these days?" The mention of Claire and her children made Ryder's fists clench. He kept his voice level, though. "What I do with my time ain't club business." Snake dismounted his bike, his leather vest creaking as he approached. The patches on his chest caught the morning sun, same ones Ryder wore on his own vest, hanging in his closet. "Everything's club business, brother. You know that." "We got a big run coming up," Crow added. "Need our best man on it." Ryder knew what that meant. The runs were never just about moving merchandise anymore. They usually ended with someone getting hurt, or worse. "I'm done with that life," Ryder said quietly. Snake's hand shot out, gripping Ryder's shoulder. It looked friendly enough, but Ryder felt the threat in those fingers. "Nobody's ever done, Red. You took the oath. Blood in, blood out, remember?" The words hit Ryder like a physical blow. He did remember. Remembered the night they'd inducted him, how the club had become his family when he had nothing else. They'd given him purpose, brotherhood, a sense of belonging he'd never known before. But now, all he could think about was Maggie's innocent smile, Max's trusting eyes, Claire's gentle touch that made him feel more human than any brotherhood ever had. "Things change," Ryder said, shrugging off Snake's hand. "Yeah?" Snake's voice dropped dangerously low. "Well, here's what hasn't changed. We need you on this run. Tonight, no excuses." Diesel revved his engine. "Unless you want us to pay your new family a visit, make sure they understand what kind of man they're dealing with." The threat sent ice through Ryder's veins. His hand shot out, grabbing Diesel's jacket. "You stay away from them." Snake stepped between them. "Then do your job, brother. Simple as that." Ryder released Diesel's jacket, taking a step back. The choice loomed before him like a chasm. The life he knew, the brothers who'd always had his back, versus the possibility of something pure and good with Claire and her children. "I'll think about it," he said finally, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Snake nodded, but his eyes were cold. "Think fast. We roll at midnight." The three bikers fired up their engines and roared away, leaving Ryder standing alone in the parking lot. The morning sun felt weak now, and the weight of his leather jacket seemed to press down on him like armor he couldn't shed. He watched until they disappeared around the corner, knowing that this wasn't over. The club wouldn't just let him walk away. They never did. And for the first time in his life, Ryder wasn't sure which path to take. Ryder paced his small apartment, the morning sun casting long shadows through the blinds. His fingers traced the patches on his leather vest, hung on a hook by the door, symbols of loyalty, brotherhood, and a life he'd lived without question for so long. The meeting with Snake and the others had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. His apartment felt like a cage now, the walls closing in with every step. Photos and memories from his years with the club stared back at him from every corner. Snapshots of wild parties, rides through desert highways, faces of men he'd once called brothers. He stopped at his dresser, picking up a faded photograph. It showed a younger version of himself, fresh-faced and angry at the world, standing proud next to his first motorcycle. The club had found him then, given him purpose when he needed it most. But now, looking at that young man's defiant smile, Ryder hardly recognized himself. "What kind of man are you?" he muttered to his reflection in the mirror above the dresser. The face that looked back was weathered, marked by years of hard living and harder choices. His tattoos told stories of loyalty and violence, promises written in ink that had seemed unbreakable. But then Maggie's laugh echoed in his memory, clear as a bell. He remembered how she'd looked at him in the park that first day, not with fear or judgment, but with simple trust. And Claire saw something in him he'd forgotten existed. Ryder sank onto the edge of his bed, head in his hands. The weight of his past pressed down on him like a physical thing. The club had been his family, his whole world for so long. They'd taken him in when no one else would, stood by him through the darkest times. But now he saw the price of that loyalty, the violence, the illegal runs, the constant looking over his shoulder. He thought about Claire's strength, how she'd rebuilt her life from nothing. She'd found the courage to leave her own dark past behind, to create something better for her children. If she could do that, maybe he could too. Standing up, Ryder walked to his closet and pulled out an old shoebox. Inside were the things he'd kept hidden even from himself. A few photos of his mother, a high school diploma he'd never picked up, a letter from his sister he'd never answered. Small pieces of a different life, one he'd abandoned long ago. The morning light caught on his rings, heavy silver bands marked with the club's symbols. He'd earned each one, paid for them in blood and loyalty. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled them off, one by one. The skin beneath was pale, marked by years of wearing them. His phone buzzed, a message from Claire. "Hope you're okay. Kids miss you." 3 simple lines that changed everything. Ryder closed his eyes, letting the warmth of those words wash over him. He thought about Max's toothy grin, Maggie's endless questions, Claire's gentle touch. They offered him something the club never could, a chance at redemption, at being the man he glimpsed in their eyes. The choice crystallized in his mind, clear as day. He couldn't keep straddling 2 worlds. The club would never let him go easily, but for the first time in years, he had something worth fighting for. Something worth changing for. Ryder stood up, straighter, his decision made. He would face Snake and the others, end this chapter of his life once and for all. The thought filled his stomach with lead, but his mind was clear. He'd rather die trying to become a better man than live as the ghost he'd been. The neon sign of the Devil's Fork bar buzzed and flickered in the late afternoon sun. Ryder pulled up on his motorcycle, his heart pounding against his ribs. The familiar row of bikes lined up outside brought back a flood of memories, some good, most bitter. Inside, cigarette smoke hung thick in the air. Snake, the club president, sat at their usual table in the back, surrounded by other members. Their leather vests gleamed with patches and pins, badges of honor in their world. Heads turned as Ryder walked in, and conversations died down to whispers. "Look who finally showed up," Snake drawled, his voice carrying across the room. He was a lean man with gray-streaked hair and eyes that never seemed to blink. "Thought maybe you'd forgotten about your family." Ryder stood his ground, his boots planted firmly on the sticky floor. "Need to talk to you, Snake, all of you." Snake gestured to an empty chair, but Ryder shook his head. He couldn't sit for this. Couldn't pretend this was just another day at the bar. "I'm out," Ryder said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "For good this time." The silence that followed was deafening. Snake's face hardened, the friendly mask slipping away. "That right?" he asked, too quietly. "And what brought this on? That little family you've been playing house with?" Ryder's jaw tightened. "This isn't about them. It's about me. I can't do this anymore." "Can't do this anymore?" Snake stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. "After everything we've done for you? Everything we've been through?" Other members started standing too, forming a loose circle around Ryder. He recognized every face, men he'd ridden with, fought beside, bled with, but now all he saw was the cage they represented. "I'm grateful for what you did for me," Ryder said, meaning it. "You took me in when I had nothing. But I need something different now." "Different?" Snake spat the word like poison. "You think you're better than us now? Think you can just walk away?" "I'm not asking for permission," Ryder replied, his voice growing stronger. "I'm telling you I'm done. No more runs, no more violence. I'm out." Snake moved closer, his boots clicking on the wooden floor. "You know it doesn't work like that, Red. Nobody just walks away." "I am." Ryder reached into his vest and pulled out his club patches. He placed them on the nearest table, the sound seemingly echoing in the tense silence. "It's over." Snake's face turned red with fury. "You ungrateful piece of—" He lunged forward, but 2 other members held him back. Ryder stood his ground, even as his old brothers cursed and threatened him. He'd expected this, prepared for it. But nothing could have prepared him for the look of betrayal in their eyes. "You're dead to us," Snake snarled, struggling against the hands holding him. You hear me? Dead. Ryder turned and walked toward the door, his steps measured and deliberate. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but he wouldn't give them that satisfaction. He pushed through the heavy wooden doors into the late afternoon sun. The parking lot was empty except for the bikes. Ryder walked to his motorcycle, swung his leg over the seat, and started the engine. The familiar rumble couldn't drown out the shouts still coming from inside the bar, but for the first time in years, those voices held no power over him. As he pulled away from the Devil's Fork, Ryder felt something lift from his shoulders, a weight he'd carried for so long he'd forgotten it was there. The wind whipped at his face, and he realized he was smiling. He was free. The morning after leaving the Devil's Fork, Ryder sat at his kitchen table, staring at his phone. He'd turned it off last night after the 100th message from his former brothers. The silence in his apartment felt different now, not lonely, but peaceful. His hands shook slightly as he made coffee. The enormity of what he'd done was finally sinking in. For 15 years, the club had been his whole world. Now that world was gone, leaving him standing on unfamiliar ground. The coffee maker sputtered and hissed. Ryder leaned against the counter, his tattooed arms crossed over his chest. Through his window, he could see people going about their morning routines, walking dogs, heading to work, living normal lives. For the first time, he felt like he might have a chance at that kind of life, too. His phone buzzed on the table. Claire's name lit up the screen. Ryder's heart quickened as he picked it up. "Hey," he answered, his voice rough from lack of sleep. "I heard what happened," Claire said softly. "Are you okay?" Ryder ran a hand through his beard. "News travels fast, huh?" "Small town." There was a pause. "Do you want to talk about it?" "Not much to say. I did what I had to do." "Are you sure about this?" Her voice held concern, but also something else. Hope, maybe. "The club. They won't just let you walk away, will they?" Ryder sighed, sinking into a kitchen chair. "Probably not without some pushback. But I'm done, Claire. Really done." "I believe you want to be," she said carefully. "But changing isn't easy. Trust me, I know." Her words hit home. Claire knew better than most how hard it was to break free from the past. She'd done it herself, escaping her abusive relationship to build a new life for her kids. "I know it won't be easy," Ryder admitted. "But I can't go back. Not after." He trailed off, thinking of Maggie's innocent smile, of Max's shy waves, of Claire's quiet strength. "The kids ask about you," Claire said, changing the subject. "Maggie wants to know if you'll come to the park today." A warmth spread through Ryder's chest. "Yeah? What time?" "Around 3. We usually go after Max's nap." "I'll be there." After hanging up, Ryder walked to his bathroom mirror. His reflection stared back, the long hair, the beard, the tattoos covering his neck and arms. To most people, he still looked every bit the intimidating biker. But something in his eyes had changed. The hardness was fading, replaced by something softer, more vulnerable. The hours crawled by until 3 o'clock. Ryder walked to the park instead of taking his bike, trying to distance himself from his old life in every way possible. He spotted Claire sitting on their usual bench, watching Maggie chase bubbles while Max toddled after her. "Red," Maggie squealed when she saw him, running over with her bubble wand. Claire smiled as he approached, but Ryder could see the caution in her eyes. She was protecting herself, protecting her kids. He couldn't blame her. "I meant what I said," he told her as he sat down. "I'm done with that life." Claire nodded slowly. "I want to believe that. But change takes time, Ryder. Real change." "I know." He watched Maggie showing Max how to blow bubbles. But I've got something worth changing for now. Claire's expression softened, but the uncertainty remained. She'd been hurt before, had promises broken too many times. She needed more than words. She needed proof that Ryder could really leave his past behind and become someone new. The afternoon sun warmed the park bench as Claire watched her children play. Maggie's laughter echoed across the playground while Max stumbled after her, determined to keep up with his big sister. Beside Claire, Ryder sat quietly, his presence both comforting and unsettling. "My ex-husband," Claire began, her voice barely above a whisper. "He made promises, too." Her hands twisted in her lap. "He'd say all the right things, make me believe he could change." Ryder turned to face her, his expression gentle despite his rough appearance. The tattoos on his neck shifted as he swallowed hard. "At first it was just little things," Claire continued. "He'd get angry over dinner being late or the house not being clean enough. Then it got worse." She took a shaky breath. Every time, he'd swear he'd do better, every single time. A cool breeze rustled the leaves above them. Maggie's voice carried across the playground as she called out to Max, showing him how to climb the small slide. "I don't want you to think I'm comparing you to him," Claire said quickly. "It's just, the kids, they're everything to me. I can't let anyone hurt them." Her voice cracked. "I can't let them see their mom make the same mistakes again." Ryder remained silent for a long moment, his weathered hands clasped together. When he spoke, his voice was low and steady. "The club. They were my family for a long time. Or at least I thought they were." He paused, watching Maggie help Max up the slide. "But seeing you with your kids, seeing what real family looks like, it changed something in me." Claire wiped at her eyes. "How can you be sure? The club was your whole life for so long." "Because for the first time, I've got something worth fighting for." Ryder's eyes met hers. "Something worth changing for, not just you and the kids, but myself too." He ran a hand through his beard. "I want to be better, not just say it, but actually do it." A mother walked past them, pulling her child closer as she eyed Ryder's tattoos. Claire noticed how he tensed slightly, then forced himself to relax. "I know words aren't enough," he continued, "and I'm not asking you to trust me right away. Just give me a chance to prove it. Day by day." Claire watched as Maggie waved at them from the top of the slide, her face beaming with joy. Max copied his sister, his tiny hand raised in an enthusiastic wave. "It's not just about leaving the club," Claire said softly. "It's about building something new, something stable." She turned to face him fully. "My kids need stability, Ryder. They need to know the people in their lives won't disappear when things get tough." "I understand," Ryder nodded. "And I'm ready for that, whatever it takes." Claire was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. The hardened exterior she'd first seen was still there, but now she could see beyond it, to the man who'd helped a lost little girl, who carried groceries without being asked, who listened when she needed to talk. "Okay," she said finally. "Show me. Show us." She managed a small smile. "We'll take it one day at a time." Relief washed over Ryder's face, softening his features. Before he could respond, Maggie came running over, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Red, come watch me on the slide," she called out, grabbing his hand. Claire nodded, giving him permission. As she watched Ryder follow Maggie to the playground, she felt a flutter of hope in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the community center's parking lot as Ryder pulled up on his motorcycle. He'd traded his leather club jacket for a simple work shirt, but his tattoos still drew curious glances from the volunteers arriving for their shifts. Sarah, the center's coordinator, greeted him with a warm smile. She was one of the few people who hadn't judged him by his appearance when he'd first inquired about volunteering. "Morning, Ryder," she said, unlocking the front door. "Ready for your first official day?" He nodded, following her inside. The center was quiet this early, but soon it would be bustling with activity. "Where do you need me to start?" "We've got donations coming in for the Single Mothers program," Sarah explained, leading him to a storage room. "Furniture, clothes, household items, they all need to be sorted and organized." Ryder rolled up his sleeves, revealing more of his tattoos. "I can handle that." As the morning progressed, more volunteers arrived. Some kept their distance, but others, seeing his dedication to the work, gradually warmed up to him. He lifted heavy furniture, assembled shelving units, and organized boxes of donations with careful attention. Around mid-morning, Claire arrived with Maggie and Max. She'd started using the center's daycare services while she worked part-time at a nearby diner. Ryder hadn't told her he'd be volunteering here. He wanted his actions to speak for themselves. Through the storage room doorway, he watched as she signed the kids in. Maggie spotted him and waved enthusiastically. "Red!" she called out, using the nickname she'd given him. Claire looked up, surprised to see him there. Their eyes met across the room, and Ryder quickly returned to his work, not wanting her to think he was showing off. Later, as he helped a young mother load a donated crib into her car, he overheard two volunteers talking. "Did you see how gentle he was with Mrs. Rodriguez's kids?" one whispered. "They were terrified of him at first, but he got down on their level and made them laugh." "I know," the other replied. "Who would have thought someone who looks like that could be so good with children?" Ryder pretended not to hear, but their words settled something in his chest. For the first time in years, people were seeing him differently, not as a threat, but as someone who could help. By afternoon, Claire returned to pick up the kids. She found Ryder sitting cross-legged on the floor with a group of children, including Max, helping them build a tower with wooden blocks. His massive frame seemed somehow smaller as he carefully placed blocks where tiny hands pointed. From her position near the doorway, Claire watched as Ryder caught Max when he stumbled, steadying the toddler with gentle hands that once would have made her flinch. She saw how the other mothers in the room had relaxed around him, how the staff trusted him with their most vulnerable clients. Maggie ran to her mother, excited to share stories about her day. "Red helped Tommy's mom move into her new apartment," she announced proudly, "and he fixed Maria's bike." Claire looked at Ryder, who was now standing awkwardly nearby, waiting for her reaction. She saw beyond the tattoos and scars to the man who'd spent his day helping others, expecting nothing in return. The man who was trying, really trying, to be better. "I heard you've been busy," she said softly. "Just trying to do my part," he replied, shuffling his feet. "The center helps people who need it. Seems like the right thing to do." The weeks melted into a comfortable routine. Ryder spent his mornings at the community center, helping wherever he was needed. The suspicious glances that had once followed him everywhere had softened into friendly nods and warm greetings. Even the most cautious mothers now trusted him with their children, seeing past his intimidating exterior to the gentle soul beneath. On this particular Tuesday morning, Ryder was organizing donations when Max toddled into the storage room, his little face lighting up at the sight of the big man. "Up!" Max demanded, raising his arms. Without hesitation, Ryder scooped him up, settling the boy on his hip as naturally as if he'd been doing it forever. "Aren't you supposed to be in daycare, little man?" Ryder asked, his gruff voice softened by affection. "He insisted on finding you," Claire said from the doorway, an apologetic smile on her face. She was dressed in her diner uniform, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. He's been asking for rye all morning." Something warm bloomed in Ryder's chest at the child's nickname for him. Max laid his head on Ryder's shoulder, completely at ease. "I can take him back," Claire offered, but Ryder shook his head. "He can help me sort these toys," he said, gesturing to a box of donated stuffed animals. "Right, buddy?" Max nodded enthusiastically, and Claire's smile widened. "Okay, but don't let him talk you into keeping all of them. We already have enough at home." Later that evening, after his shift at the center, Ryder found himself at Claire's apartment. It had become a regular occurrence, helping with dinner, playing with the kids, being part of their evening routine. The small living room was cluttered with toys and children's books, but it felt more like home than any place he'd ever known. Maggie sat at the coffee table, coloring intently while Max played with blocks on the carpet. Claire moved around the kitchen, preparing a simple dinner, and Ryder helped by setting the table. The domestic scene would have seemed impossible just months ago, but now it felt right. "Red," Maggie called out, holding up her drawing. "Look what I made." Ryder crossed the room and crouched beside her, studying the colorful scribbles. "Is that all of us?" he asked, pointing to the 4 stick figures she'd drawn. "Uh-huh," she nodded proudly. "That's you with all your pictures," she explained, pointing to the tallest figure covered in squiggly lines representing his tattoos. Claire watched from the kitchen, her heart full at the sight of her daughter sharing her artwork with Ryder. The man who had once seemed so dangerous now sat cross-legged on her floor, praising a child's drawing as if it were a masterpiece. After dinner and bedtime stories, with both children tucked in, Claire and Ryder sat on the small balcony. The night was cool and quiet, the city lights twinkling below them. Neither felt the need to fill the silence with words. Claire's shoulder brushed against Ryder's arm, and for the first time, there was no tension in the touch, no lingering uncertainty. Ryder looked down at Claire, noting how the moonlight softened her features. She seemed more relaxed than he'd ever seen her, comfortable in his presence in a way that made his heart ache with gratitude. They sat together, sharing the peaceful moment, 2 people who had found something unexpected in each other's broken pieces. Claire gazed at Ryder's profile in the soft evening light, marveling at how different he seemed from the intimidating figure she'd first encountered in the park. His beard was neatly trimmed now, and though his tattoos still covered his arms and neck, they no longer seemed threatening. Instead, they were just another part of him, like the gentle way he spoke to her children or his quiet laugh when Max did something silly. "What are you thinking about?" Ryder asked, catching her stare. Claire smiled, drawing her knees up to her chest. "Just remembering the first time we met. How scared I was when I found Maggie with you." "Can't blame you," he said, his voice low and thoughtful. "I know what I looked like, what I still look like to most people." "But that's just it," Claire said, turning to face him fully. "You're nothing like what you seemed. I remember how gentle you were with Maggie even then. I was too worried to see it clearly at the time, but looking back, you were already different from what I expected." Ryder shifted in his seat, still uncomfortable with praise. "The kids made it easy," he admitted. "They never looked at me like I was dangerous. Especially Maggie. She just saw someone who could help her." "They have good instincts," Claire said softly. She watched as a gentle breeze ruffled his long hair. "You know, Max asked me yesterday if you were going to stay forever." Ryder's breath caught audibly. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I hoped so." Claire felt her cheeks warm at the admission. "The way you are with them, it's amazing to watch. Sometimes I catch myself wondering if I'm dreaming, if this is all real." "It's real," Ryder assured her, his voice rough with emotion. "Sometimes I wonder the same thing. A few months ago, I was lost. Didn't even know how lost until Maggie asked me that question in the park. Claire reached out and touched his arm, her fingers tracing one of his tattoos. You've changed so much since then. The way you help at the community center, how you've become such a positive influence. I'm proud of you, Ryder. He covered her hand with his own, larger one. Let's go for a walk, he suggested. The sunset's beautiful tonight. They made their way down to the park, the same park where their story had begun. The evening air was cool and sweet, carrying the scent of blooming flowers. Other families were heading home for the night, and the playground was nearly empty. They found a bench facing west, where the sky was painted in brilliant oranges and pinks. Ryder took Claire's hand in his, their fingers intertwining naturally. The simple gesture still amazed her, how comfortable they'd become with each other, how easy it was to just be together. You know, Ryder said, his eyes on the sunset, I used to come here to escape, to be alone. Now it's different. Everything's different. Claire squeezed his hand. Good different? The best kind, he replied, turning to look at her. I've never felt more at peace than I do right now, sitting here with you. The living room of Claire's apartment was filled with afternoon sunlight and the sound of children's laughter. Ryder sat cross-legged on the carpet, surrounded by colorful building blocks that Max had scattered everywhere. The 2-year-old was busy stacking them into wobbly towers, his little face scrunched in concentration. Higher, Max demanded, pushing more blocks toward Ryder. All right, buddy, Ryder chuckled, carefully adding another block to their creation. His large, tattooed hands looked almost comical handling the tiny toys, but he'd grown used to being gentle with them. Maggie bounced over from the kitchen table where she'd been coloring. I want to play too. She plopped down beside them, her dark curls bouncing. Can we make a castle, Uncle Ryder? Ryder's hands froze mid-stack. His heart skipped a beat at the name she'd used so casually. Uncle Ryder. The words echoed in his mind, filling his chest with an unfamiliar warmth. He glanced up to find Claire watching from the kitchen doorway, a soft smile on her face. Sure thing, Princess, he managed to say, his voice a little rougher than usual. What kind of castle should we build? A big one. Maggie spread her arms wide, with towers and a bridge and... She continued listing features while Max knocked over their previous creation, giggling as the blocks clattered across the floor. Ryder helped them gather the scattered pieces, showing them how to build a stronger foundation. His mind kept returning to that simple word, uncle. It was such a small thing, but it meant everything. These children, who had every reason to fear him, had accepted him completely. Like this? Maggie asked, carefully placing a block on their growing structure. Perfect, Ryder praised. He watched as she beamed with pride, remembering how scared her mother had been when they first met. Now here he was, spending Sunday afternoon building block castles with her children. Max toddled over with more blocks, babbling excitedly. He stumbled, falling against Ryder's knee, but instead of crying, he just grabbed onto Ryder's arm to steady himself. The toddler's tiny fingers traced one of his tattoos with curiosity, completely unafraid. Uncle Ryder, Maggie said again, this time tugging on his sleeve to get his attention. Can we have ice cream after dinner? There it was again, that rush of emotion. Ryder looked at these two innocent faces gazing up at him with such trust and felt his throat tighten. He'd never imagined being anyone's uncle, never thought he'd be worthy of such a title. Yet here he was, building castles and discussing ice cream like it was the most natural thing in the world. That's up to your mom, he said, glancing toward Claire. She was still watching them, her eyes slightly wet with unshed tears. She gave a small nod, understanding the significance of this moment. The castle grew taller as they worked together, Maggie directing their efforts while Max occasionally added random blocks wherever he could reach. Ryder found himself relaxing into this simple activity, letting go of the tough exterior he'd maintained for so long. With these kids, he didn't need to be intimidating or guarded. He could just be Uncle Ryder, the man who built block castles and considered ice cream requests. The afternoon sun painted their creation in warm light, casting long shadows across the carpet. In this moment, surrounded by toys and trust and innocent love, Ryder felt something shift inside him. He wasn't just a visitor in their lives anymore. He was family. The evening sun cast long shadows across Claire's small kitchen table as she and Ryder sat together, sharing cups of coffee. The kids were finally asleep, their soft breathing audible through the baby monitor on the counter. Claire wrapped her hands around her mug, savoring its warmth. "I've been thinking," Ryder said, his voice low and gentle. "My apartment's too far from here, and it's not exactly kid-friendly." He paused, running a finger along the rim of his cup. "Maybe we should look for a place together. Something with a yard for the kids." Claire's heart fluttered. She'd been hoping he would bring this up, but hadn't wanted to push. "You really want that?" "More than anything." Ryder reached across the table, taking her hand in his. His tattoos seemed less intimidating now, just part of who he was. "I know it's a big step, but these past months with you and the kids, it's shown me what I want in life." Claire squeezed his hand. "Tell me what you're thinking." "I want a home," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just a place to live, but somewhere we can all be together. Maybe a small house in that neighborhood near the park, the one with all the trees." His eyes lit up as he continued. "Max could have a sandbox, and Maggie could have her own little garden." Claire smiled, picturing it. "She'd love that. She's already trying to grow flowers in paper cups on the windowsill." "I noticed." Ryder's expression grew serious. "Claire, I want you to know something. Those kids, they mean everything to me now. I know I'm not their real father, but—" "You're more of a father than their real dad ever was," Claire interrupted softly. Ryder nodded, taking a deep breath. "I want to be there for them, for all the little things, helping with homework, teaching them to ride bikes, being there when they're scared or happy or just need someone to talk to." His voice grew stronger as he continued. "I want to be the kind of father figure they deserve." Claire felt tears welling up in her eyes. She'd never expected to find someone who would love her children as much as she did. "They already adore you," she whispered, "and I adore them." Ryder's thumb traced circles on her palm. "But we need to do this right. We need to make sure they feel secure, that they know this is permanent." "What are you suggesting?" "Let's take a drive this weekend. Look at some houses in that neighborhood. We can bring the kids. Let them see what they think." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "I've saved up some money. It's not a fortune, but it's enough for a down payment on something modest." Claire's breath caught. "You've really thought this through." "I have." Ryder stood up, still holding her hand, and guided her towards the window. The park where they'd first met was visible in the distance, its trees silhouetted against the darkening sky. "Want to take a walk? The kids are asleep, and Mrs. Johnson next door has the baby monitor." Claire nodded, and soon they were strolling through the familiar paths of the park. They stopped at the bench where Maggie had first approached Ryder all those months ago. Sitting down, Ryder turned to face Claire. "I need you to know something," he said, his voice steady and sure. "Whatever happens, wherever life takes us, I'm going to be here for you and the kids. That's not just a promise, it's a vow. You three are my family now, and I will always protect and love you." The late afternoon sun painted the park in warm, golden hues as Ryder walked along the familiar path. His large hand held tiny Maggie's, while Claire pushed Max in his stroller beside them. The difference between this moment and his first days in the park struck him deeply. Back then, he'd been alone, intimidating, a figure people avoided. Now children waved as they passed, and other parents nodded in friendly recognition. "Uncle Ryder, look!" Maggie tugged at his hand, pointing to a group of ducks waddling near the pond. Her excitement made his heart swell. "Can we feed them?" "Not today, sweetie," Claire answered, adjusting Max's hat. "We didn't bring any bread." "Next time we'll remember," Ryder promised, giving Maggie's hand a gentle squeeze. The way her face lit up at his simple promise still amazed him. Such a small gesture could mean so much to a child. They continued their walk, passing the playground where several kids were climbing and sliding. Max squealed from his stroller, clearly wanting to join them. Claire laughed, unbuckling him and lifting him out. "Go ahead, buddy. Show Uncle Ryder how good you are at climbing." Ryder watched as Max toddled toward the playground, Claire close behind him. His chest tightened with emotion. Not the painful kind he'd known for so many years, but something warm and fulfilling. He'd never imagined himself here, part of a family scene like this. "Are you happy, Uncle Ryder?" Maggie asked suddenly, looking up at him with those searching eyes that seemed to see right through him. He knelt down to her level, something that had become natural to him now. "Very happy, kiddo. How about you?" "I'm happy too," she declared, wrapping her small arms around his neck in a quick hug before running off to join her brother on the playground. Ryder stood, watching Claire help Max up the small slide, while Maggie showed off her big girl climbing skills. The setting sun cast long shadows across the playground, and families were starting to head home for dinner. But Ryder wasn't ready to leave just yet. "I'm going to sit for a minute," he called to Claire, gesturing to the nearby bench, the same one where he'd first met Maggie months ago. Claire nodded, understanding in her eyes. She knew what this bench meant to him. Ryder settled onto the familiar wooden slats, his tattooed arms no longer drawing fearful glances from passers-by. He watched his family playing, the sound of their laughter carrying across the park. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, reminding him of new beginnings rather than endings. This bench had once been his refuge from a world he felt apart from, a place where he'd sat alone with his thoughts and regrets. Now, it was something entirely different, a reminder of how life could change when you opened your heart to possibility. He watched as Claire gathered the kids, Max's tired head resting on her shoulder, Maggie skipping beside her as they made their way toward him. The peace he felt in this moment was something he'd never known in his old life. Not with the motorcycle club, not in any of his previous attempts at finding belonging. Here, on this bench where it all began, Ryder finally felt complete. His past no longer weighed him down. Instead, it had led him here, to this family, to this moment of pure contentment. As the last rays of sunlight painted the sky, Ryder embraced his new life with a full heart, knowing he was exactly where he was meant to be. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.